G'day, guys. Looking at the recent sort of developments with the banking system in America and elsewhere, you've got, two recent banks. I mean, one that really didn't register too much on the radar of most people, which was Silvergate, and then recently the SVB sort of collapse that took place. A lot of people don't realise that there's probably about another, 10 banks on the chopping board that are at high risk. A lot of them, like SVP and a few others, are involved a bit in the cryptocurrency market, and there's a lot of pressure in that marketplace currently. And in the UK, things are really getting into a sort of a panic level in that regard. So, it's not looking good. It's not looking good at all. And I put the blame on Jeremy Powell from the chairman of the Fed. He's really mismanaged this whole situation. He listened to the politicians. He employed their policies, and that's why we're in this mess. Their whole purpose was they decided that we're going to cut off Europe. We're going to try and cut off most of the world, and we're going to go after Russia. We're going to limit their sort of capacity to put out stuff. So what do they do? Their idea was, let's raise interest rates. That will reduce demand, reduce in the West. Who cares about decimating the middle classes? This is geopolitics. Well, at the same time, we'll put pressure on Russia. What did Russia do? What did the Arabs do? This is the important. What did the Arabs do? They switched sides. The Arabs, especially the Gulf cooperation countries, been very loyal to America for a very long time because they have strategic, let's say, differences with the Shiites of Iran. So it's not only religious, being Sunnis and Shiites, but also strategic differences over a very long time. It goes right back to ancient times. Even us Greeks have always had friction with, the old Persian Empire and stuff like that. So it's nothing new. This has been going on for a very long time. But in the modern era, the funny thing is, in recent times, if you take a look at the Chinese diplomacy in the background that nobody's not noticing, they've been basically going back to Tehran and to Riyadh. If anybody's been noticing that, that's diplomacy to try and actually get them both into the BRIC nations to reduce the tensions between the two and try and come to some sort of amicable thing. Again, the Saudis are really annoyed with the Americans, how they handed Iraq, overthrowing a Sunni minority that controlled Iraq and gave it to the Shiites, which basically gave it to the Iranians, which meant that the Iranians then could go via Iraq territory into Syria and have access to the Mediterranean. So a bit of a disaster there as well in terms of the way things, this is again, the State Department in the US not understanding geopolitics, not understanding the region, and let's just get the Turks in there with the Brotherhood to really mess up and the Arab Spring that turned into an Arab nightmare, because really the Turks had their own geopolitics, especially Erdogan, because his goal was to try and undermine the political powers within the Middle East and actually control them, their own little neo-Ottoman ambitions that they have. So it's a lot of this sort of nonsense that's actually happened that have really driven this sort of mess. And what it's actually done is it shifted the Arabs away from the US because they knew the US was behind all this, putting their own regimes at risk and at danger. So I can understand why they were pissed off, because I would be as well. Let's put it that way. And I am as well, because as a Greek citizen, I may not be living there, but at the same time, a dual national, they've made a mess of the region and really destabilized for no good damn reason. And now they're destabilizing the entire, Eastern Europe, again, with very poor strategy. This Biden administration has been terrible. I thought Obama was bad, but this is like on steroids. The incompetency is just beyond a joke. What can one say in that regard? The problem is that what they've used is a strategy which they thought that they would basically fight. Remember, I did a video not too long ago. I'll put it up here at the end at this point, so people that don't remember, I did it earlier this year and covering about how OPEC plus is the OPEC country, the oil producing countries plus Russia, that's OPEC plus, and the other side of the gamut is the Fed. So this has been a fight to bring down demand in the West, cutting off oil supply, North Stream pipeline, all these sort of things, cutting off energy and trying to, go green and all this other nonsense, which is just crazy. It's just absolutely crazy. At the other end, I'll put that other video about how much materials are needed. We'd all have to become miners to be able to do first generation green technology. It's just not going to happen. It's completely and utterly bonkers, the whole idea. These people, what a guy that I in Greece, I'll actually show you his analysis, because he actually did analysis on a number of vulnerable banks in America, and he's got this is a list that he did slightly a while back, and on this list is one of the banks that went down, because this was right after Silvergate. He did this, and then SVB Financial Group is on that list. I'll show it to you shortly, and you'll actually see, and you go, oh, really? Exactly. So he's pretty good at predicting things. He's a geopolitical analyst, and George Adalis is his actual name. He lives in Greece. He does a lot of geopolitical analysis and a lot of stuff like that. I have come across him recently, and I have to say he thinks very much like I do, outside the box, and thinks about, energy. He's another one of those, a bit like the guy, that other guy that is, peak prosperity, that promotes energy as a fundamental thing. George is the same. Like me, I've always been the energy potentiality of system. It's all energy. Stupid. It's all energy. If you've got cheap energy, you can produce a lot of goods and services and keep inflation down. You don't fight OPEC plus, which is the oil producers and Russia. You don't fight them with raising interest rates and destroying the middle classes and most of the economies of the Western economies. It doesn't affect Russia because Russia's de-dollarized. And let's say the Chinese decide they get wet feet because they get pissed off with America, and already there's been a bit of a move to get out of dollar as well. So that's also happening. It's sort of happening in the background. They're sort of withdrawing some of their cash reserves from Western banks. It's happening very slowly at the moment. So there's no run on the banks. There's nothing like that. So they can guarantee they can get the stuff out. But they're getting it out slowly, under the radar, so to speak. So people don't notice it. The whole thing, you don't want to panic. It's the whole thing. Even that guy from the CEO from SVB, what an idiot. An absolute, as Bart Kay would say, cockwomble. What an absolute retard. And he's been in years in the industry. Why would you ever tell anyone what was happening in your bank? Okay, your interest rates are going up. Well, who's at fault? Well, he's at fault. He's the CEO. Why didn't he replace his risk assessment officer? His chief risk assessment officer had actually resigned a year earlier. She was still getting paid until about April, and that was because she probably had accumulated leave entitlements and stuff like that. and she was getting paid. That's fine. But what about replacing her? Had they noticed, they would have basically be able to make adjustments. What sort of adjustments? They would have basically slowly been trying to take a bit of extra insurance, because they only had about 7% insurance, offload some of this sort of certain stuff, use some other instrument to protect themselves against the rising interest rates. There's a lot of things you can do. I'm not going to go into the complex sort of banking things that can be done. I mean, even if you didn't, let's say you didn't want to do that, you realized you have effed up and you basically have no option. What do? You're on a plane, don't tell anyone, you fly to Qatar or to fly to the United Arab Emirates or to the Saudis, and you say, I need help, I'll give you equity. And you make a quick deal, they give you the money, you come back and you cover that shortfall. Nobody knows. Got it? And then you dilute, the stock of others. Complete and utter, what can one say? I mean, even Lehman Brothers, when they were right at the end, they actually kept their mouth shut and they went to the other banks trying to get help, and nobody would give them help. But you don't tell everyone. And no wonder people were rushing in to try and get their deposits. Very poor on his side in terms of management in that regard. So yeah, that's another sort of mess in that regard. But at the same time, what has happened is, Jerome Powell is really the one that's actually caused this, because he's in cahoots with Janet Yellen and Biden, and they're all behind the strategy against. This is all the strategy. This is the other element of the strategy against Russia, the financial war against Russia, that these lunatics have started. It's not only a military, it's also a financial war. They failed on both. Absolutely failed on both. Why wouldn't they? Because they have this false sense that because the dollar is a reserve currency, that it's dominant, but it's not underpinned by anything. Fundamentally, everybody has seen that the emperor is, without clothes. They've realized that basically it's bullshit. At the end of the day, we are the wealthy ones because we have the oil, we have the actual minerals, we have all the stuff that actually can allow you to produce cheap goods and services. That's another reason why, things like cryptocurrencies are tanking, because the data mine requires energy, and as energy becomes more expensive, so does basically being able to data mine. So yeah, that's going backwards as well. And some of these companies, like SVB, they were exposed to basically certain startup companies, and in particular Bitcoin companies and stuff like that. So they were getting pressure from all sorts of ends in that regard. But the biggest pressure that came to them, that really created that blowout, where as interest rates went up, when you've got that sort of differential about, you're getting a 3%, and then you've got pretty much that 1% for all the transactions, about 2% you can actually provide to your investors. At the end of the day, when that goes beyond that, you've got a shortfall. And that's going to basically end up on your balance sheet one way or another, unless you can actually, because they took no remedial action in the early stages 12 months ago, when it was starting to happen as interest rates start going up. And this is the problem. They really took the focus off that this was a long term, because of, this is the problem. People don't understand energy's fundamental. If you don't have enough cheap energy, you cannot monetize the productivity of energy and technology. But if you've got cheap energy, you can basically keep on debasing your country and currency and printing money, because pretty much the productivity that's coming from cheap energy and all that masks that devaluation. You can keep on doing that. But you can't if your energy becomes expensive. Your costs of production become expensive and inflation goes up. That actually puts pressure on an investor sitting there going, I'm not going to put money into that. It's going to sit on the sideline. Because seeing what happened to the interest rates and how that's affecting the bond market, they're not going to get into new debt. The investor's just going to sit on the side and go, well, let's wait and see what explodes. Because that's, as George says, if you put enough pressure into anything, something's going to give at some point. And a smart investor understands that somewhere in the system, you're going to have weakness where things are going to, that domino effect, you're going to get that sort of effect. Now, they're trying to stop that by stopgapping, trying to put money and support into depositors and stuff like that to try and reduce the panic. And that's a good strategy. That's a good thing. But they don't have a lot in the kitty. It's about 100, that sort of safety net is about 100 billion. If things really unravel with this strategy, then things could get worse. Then they may have to go to Congress. And, at the end of the day, just think of the Chinese as one of those foreign investors decide, oh, we don't want to actually provide any liquidity to the Americans. They're a threat to us. Let them fall. So these people have been playing with fire. And the thing is, as George says, and I agree with him completely, and I've said this ages ago, it's nothing new. So this is why I like this guy, because I've come across him and I'm going, he thinks the same way as me. He actually does think, one thing that does annoy me, he thinks that, there may be a problem with the greenhouse and stuff like that. And I completely disagree with him on that. That's just basically nonsense science that has come up with these, and bankers that want to make money from carbon credits and stuff like that. I've mentioned this before. The predicting the weather is nearly impossible. Taking into account all these different things, we've got very poor data, and we're extrapolating through, models that are just a joke, fabrications. No different than epidemiology, with poor data in, and then adjustments. That's the same sort of nonsense that's happening in the climatology area. It's very poor. This is why they fail in so many of the predictions. They, even all their models actually are outside the range always, and they have to keep on adjusting them. That tells you that they've got no idea. So it's just another pie in the sky bit of nonsense. But unfortunately, they've convinced so many people in the West, and now we have these lords of climate, and these lords of climate are unwilling to see the problem, and they think they can fight OPEC plus one, which is Russia, with this method. They can't. You cannot fight. All you're going to do is decimate the banking system and decimate the middle classes with raising interest rates continuously. That's not how you fight. You want to fight them, you want to cut their revenue. You don't want to increase their revenue, because people still need fuel to move around, fuel to heat their homes. They still need this stuff. And demand for energy is going up, not going down. So it's ridiculous. What they should be doing is investing. There is heaps and heaps of gas fields in Greece, heaps and heaps of gas fields in the Western Mediterranean as well, that haven't been looked at. There's heaps in the North Sea that haven't been looked at because the British don't want to touch them. Another crazy bunch of politicians up there, woke politicians. And these woke politicians are destroying the West and don't realize you want to combat Russia and OPEC, produce more energy so you're less reliant on them, and you force down the price. If every single Western country announced, we're going to drill and drill and drill, you know what would happen immediately? The markets would look at that and say long-term prices are going to come down because there's going to be supply. Prices come down very fast. Got it? And then you can stop raising interest rates, because if you continue raising interest rates, you're going to blow up the property market, you're going to blow up the banking system, and you're going to impoverish everybody in the West. That's all. You're not going to defeat Russia economically. And these people have got no freaking idea. Now, let me show you the list of the stars in this sort of future calamities. So this is George's list of his favorite, not really, companies. So you got got this, what is it? Not even sure what that writes up there. Look like Customers Bancorp Incorporated. Then there's First Republic Bank, Sandy Spring Bancorp, New York Community Bancorp, First Foundation Incorporated, LE Finance Incorporated, DIM Community Bank Shares Incorporated, Pacific Premium Bancorp Incorporated, Prosperity Bank Share Incorporated, and Columbia Financial Incorporated. Now, we're not going to worry about SVP because they've already hit the wall. And as you can see, these are the sort of negative numbers on them, you know, like 10.5. And you can already see Columbia Finance 14.5, Pacific Premium not too far away. Again, Dime Community, I mean, Ally Finance at 24 in the negative. You know, so First Foundation Incorporated, they're not too bad. They're in a much better situation, but things could get worse because we don't really know. Remember, this is old data. So what the current information is, I don't know. So he hasn't put anything up quite recently, like in the last couple of days. I think he's working on it, but he hasn't actually put anything up at the moment. So First Republic, yep. And that first one, that's so, yeah. So that Bancorp Incorporated, that's part of a larger group. And so that group is, but these are separate entities within that group. So these are sort of the that are under risk. There could be others as well that, you know, sometimes they could be further down the track before they become vulnerable. So we don't know. Probably the one that's actually got least problems is JP Morgan. That's funny. Anyway, because they were in the height of the previous crisis. Maybe they learned something. But this isn't like the sort of crisis that we had in 2008. Okay, this is pretty much one engineered by the Fed. The Fed has caused this by trying to fight Russia and the OPEC, you know, with higher interest rates. What I said earlier, I talked about last time, that there's this, you know, conflict trying to bring them down and all that. Now, on a few other minor things, now there may be some of you, I don't know, some of you out there that may be involved in, let's say you've got some investments in like tech businesses or Bitcoin, or exposed to, let's say, the Indian market, because the Indian market, about 10% of it, I believe, well, up to 10%. It could be slightly lower, are exposed to SVB. So some of those companies may be okay. They may be able to get additional finance elsewhere. Some of them, you know, may be more exposed than somebody knows. I got no idea. You know, I've not really looked into the Indian market to be able to tell people exactly. But if people are invested in entities that are connected to SVB, you know, yeah, I'll leave that. This is not financial advice. I'm just giving you the information, the analysis that this person has done on these companies. Okay, so just keep that very much in mind, that this is not financial advice. This is just giving people a bit of information about what is afoot, in this sort of environment and to understand what's actually been happening. So yeah, so look, the thing is, at the moment, I'm really concerned about, I mean, I know Biden came out and he was just talking nonsense, again, as usual. I think I don't need to share that anymore. That's quite clear. You guys got that. I'll put a link to that. I'll put a link to also George's article. I think I may be able, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and convert it to translate it into English and then put it on as a PDF and then attach it so anybody can read exactly what he wrote, because it's in Greek. And so now I'm going to put it through Google Translator. So some stuff may not translate as well. So keep that in mind. So don't basically bash me over there and, oh, this doesn't make sense. You know, I'll read, I'll proofread it and try and actually, you know, on the quick. So but that doesn't guarantee that I'm going to pick up everything. But that will give you a bit of an insight about, you know, some of the, because he goes into some of the details about how much money this person got or that person got, or where they were in terms of the you know, things that they purchased and certain things that they did, and you know, the sort of the asset pool within those companies and blah blah blah. Or he goes into some of these details which people may want to read those technical details. That's fine. So I'll actually provide some of that. And yeah, I'll leave it at that in that regard. But coming back to, you know, my expertise is not in banking. Okay. So while I've been an investor for most of my life, well, most of my adult life, you know, at the same time for a couple of decades now, at the same time, I don't consider myself an expert, and I would never give advice to anyone. I do my own stuff and I do a lot of research, and sometimes, you know, I get it wrong and right, you know, so I'm not the person you want to basically, I'll give you some other people's information. But the thing is, what I do understand basics, the most important things, how an economy works and stuff like that. Those sort of things. I've actually read a lot of books on economics from both the left and the right, from diverse areas, and have a deep understanding about, you know, how the system works and all that. So, I mean, you know, no system is perfect. Humans have created imperfect systems. We live in a fallen realm. And the reality is, people need to realize that even the fundamentals of a market economy and all that goes through cycles. And it goes through cycles of every 80 years to 100 years. We go through these multiple small debt cycles. All those, what we call, you know, boom busts, they're just little cycles of over exuberance and, you know, overinflating things and then busting, and then overinflating again and busting, and overinflating again and busting, and overinflating again. These are just cycles. They happen every, you know, 8 to 10 years, probably 9 years on average, more or less. We have these little boom bust cycles, and we use over 80 to 100 years. We usually have the big calamities where, like, in the middle of the 19th century, there was the long recession, and then there was the Great Depression after the 29 crash through the 30s. So these are the sort of things, you know, so we're close to something like that. I sort of, a couple of, back in 2006, I mean, 20, yep, same thing. I basically said that 2025 would be the ultimate reckoning. They couldn't push it beyond that point. Maybe we're getting closer to that than, you know, just because of all these other things that have happened. And basically, you know, the COVID things and all that, they've really ballooned out the crisis. They've really pushed out the debt levels to stratospheric levels beyond what they've done in the past. And so a lot of things have been overinflated. And it is concerning. And then on the flip side, you've got this madness, you know. Maybe they want to engineer a fall much quicker. You know, they know it's going to happen, and they want to, you know, to basically put us on a war footing and then blame the Russians and all that, when they deliberately knew that it was going to happen anyway, and just force the issue and, you know, achieve the dream of the World Economic Forum. You'll own nothing because you'll be decimated as middle class. And you'll be happy and controlled, and then be used as cannon fodder for the elites to be killed off a bit quicker, so they can bring down the global population. So, you know, I know it sounds, but you start thinking about these things and wondering, you know, what's the end game? Because it makes no sense. If you want to fight inflation, you bring cost of producing goods and services down. That's cheap energy. You start getting gas out of everywhere. Why are they basically putting all these impediments in Europe, North America, and all that, saying, no, you're not going to get the Greek gas out, you're not going to do that? They're putting limitations and pressures. Energy is going up, and things are really getting unhinged. And these people are continually to push this. These lords of these EcoLords are driving the whole West into a collapse. It's just crazy. I don't know what the end game is. I truly don't know what the end game is, or whether they even know what the end game is. Whether this is some nefarious forces that are pushing in this direction, but at the same time, a lot of stupid people that have just jumped on the bandwagon and don't know what they're effing doing. So, you know, it's really concerning where everything's becoming very unhinged and all that. All I can say is, guys, look after yourselves. Try and make some plans to basically have, you know, a bit of gold and silver on the side, some land, some capacity to survive the future, because it's not looking good. And those people that are supposedly in charge don't seem to know what they're doing. It's quite concerning, and it doesn't seem to be getting better. It's just, these people are just ratcheting up and exacerbating issues, and then band-aiding things at this stage. But that's not sustainable. In the long run, things are going to fall apart. How quick, and, you know, and which groups in the society are going to be hit more or less? You know, you can be definitely sure the elites are not going to be hit, but you know, within our society, it's going to vary to the degree that people get hit. It depends how much you're tied into this system. The less you're tied into the system, if you've got your own land, your own resources, stuff like that, you may be in a better position that compared to somebody who's in a city, who's got less resources and is more vulnerable to these sort of effects. So it's, yeah. And in societies where there's a bigger population, you've got more pressures. There's more pressures on that society, because there's more people clamoring for similar key items, in particular energy. And yeah, so it's not looking good for a lot of people. And I say to people, you need to start calling politicians, and I'm not kidding you. Look at, you know, we've seen a number of things happen around the world in certain places where people really started threatening politicians, and certain things started happening. You know, I mean, we're even now starting to see the exposure of certain things. People are calling their politicians, saying, you know, all about their rights being stripped away, and this sort of crazy woke agenda that's trying to, and these institutions like the FBI and all that are trying to undermine the First Amendment in the US, but generally other organizations in other countries that are doing something similar. So there is a bit of movement on that, but we also need to move on the energy front. You know, all these other things are important, but the energy is the fundamental thing. we don't have enough cheap energy, we're screwed. I'm not kidding you. We are stuffed completely. We need to basically be calling our politicians and telling them that in the next election, if you don't basically vote to get more oil and gas out of the ground, I'm not voting for you. And you need to basically, we need to sort to get more and more people within our family and others to do that. Be that vocal minority, in a sense. We need to basically make them feel scared. That's what we need. Write things to the editor. Put things out there. That's what we need. We need to push for oil and gas, coal and nuclear. And I don't care what it is, as long as it's cheaper energy. We need to basically start getting more cheap energy in the system, because only cheap energy can deal with this. I'll give you an example. The US after the Second World War had a debt to GDP of 244%. Got it? 244. It's quite a lot, far more than what it is today. It's in the sort of realm that Japan is, but there's a lot of, let's say, I've talked about before about Japan, the sort of the intergenerational transfer and this sort of, they're buying most of the debt up themselves. So it's sort of, they may be doing a reset, but that's a different, that's for, I've talked about that before. Most of my long-term sort of subscribers are well aware of that. But cheap energy that came out of the Second World War, America had massive productivity, like had a massive industrial base to produce goods and services, plus a lot of cheap energy in oil and gas, in oil primarily, and coal. That made the difference. That allowed the consumer revolution, the middle class, rapid middle class growth, and the sort of golden years of capitalism. The golden years of capitalism was cheap energy. That's what it was, cheap energy. Go back throughout history, most of civilization was like a flat line. Barter economy, limited, whatever was available, that's what you traded. And then your own labor, how much you worked, and then how much your overlord extracted from you under the threat of, you know. So that's how it worked back then. Now they use taxes. Back then they used to knock you off if you didn't pay it to the overlord or to the emperor or whatever. And that's how it worked. But nowadays, you know, when we got out after the Second World War, there was so much cheap energy around. It was cheap to produce a lot of things. And then in the 60s, we had the Green Revolution. Cheap to produce foods. And what happened was the cost of living came down considerably. And that's why we had the golden years. It wasn't that capitalism was special. It could have been any system. You know, some societies did worse because of poor management. You know? But even the Soviet Union through the 50s and 60s and, you know, and 70s, they actually grew quite well. And then they stagnated because they didn't use the wealth that they got. They put it into weapons rather than actually putting it into improving their productivity of their systems. So a lot of their systems were still antiquated. You know, so they didn't, because there was no internal competition to generate the necessity to improve the means of production or the machine tools and all that sort of stuff. And that's, you know, because they had a lot of cheap energy for a very long time coming out of, you know, the Caspian Sea and those sort of areas. But it was cheap energy that would allow them to become, you know, a global superpower. It was, again, cheap energy. So they may have used it for in different ways, but it was, again, cheap energy. Cheap energy is what makes the difference. It's what took us. Animal energy, horsepower. That's what we still use it now, horsepower. Animal energy is what took us out of a tribal state. Obviously, there were deleterious effects on the dietary side. I agree. You know, we're not arguing on that point. But in terms of moving up to get to this stage where you've got computers and all sorts of things, cars and things that fly in the sky and things like that. You needed to go through that development over a very long period of time. But that's what's made the difference. Cheap energy. The energy potentiality of the system. I've said it and I'll say it again. We need cheap energy. Period. Call your pollies, tell them to pull their finger out and start initiating all sorts of developments everywhere. If the West can start getting oil and gas out in massive amounts, you know what it's going to do? It's going to drive the oil price down. And you know what's going to do that? It's going to lower interest rates. It's going to take the pressure off the currencies of the West and the economies of the West. And it's going to make a lot of German industry and other industries viable again, competitive with Asia. And we've got a bit of more technology than they have. So we're even more, even we'll have, if not equal, because of their lower wage sort of level, at least we'll be competitive on par. But at the moment, we're stuffed. Germany's deindustrializing. You know, things are going to Hungary because they've still got gas that's coming in from Russia with their little cozy deal. Good for them. Orban, good on you, mate. He basically told the Americans and the Europeans he was going to look after his own people, not allow them to go cold or starve. So I don't blame him, because it's stupid politics. Had the West actually 2 years earlier realized, if they were going for this plan or whatever, where was their strategy to invest? And each time they lower interest rates, the morons at the Fed, Jeremy Powell has no idea. He has to go. He's destroying the United States and many other Western countries that because they use the US dollar, they're actually being affected in terms of exchange rates and in terms of buying their energy in US dollar. It's killing Europe. High US dollar is killing Europe. And Jeremy Powell needs to go. He needs to go yesterday, not today. He's destroying the West. Simple as that. The strategy has failed. Russia is basically in a much better position. They're making shitloads of money. They're doing what fine, thank you very much. And now they've even got the Chinese who basically are siding with them, and they'll provide them with additional toys to keep up the battles. We need to stop this foolish strategy. And it was foolish that we forced the Russians into the hands of the great panda. So the Russian bear and the panda are now very close friends. That was a bad strategy. Even Kissinger realized that. Then he changed his tune because they pressured him. Because, again, he succumbed to wokeness because he didn't want to basically go down in history hated by everyone. So again, he goes, oh, I'm too old for this. So I'll just agree with them, not fight them. But his initial analysis was correct. Why the hell are you forcing the Russians into the Chinese hands? Why the hell are you creating this massive Eurasian economic group that can actually outcompete on industrial capacity, on finance, on raw materials, on energy, and on foods? Why? How insane are you to do that? Is beyond me. It's just crazy, the sort of stuff that they're doing. And that's what's happening, let alone you look at the Netherlands attacking their own farmers, some of the most productive farmers in the world, very competitive, producing stuff at a very cost-effective level. And now they're trying to force them out of business. Some of the most productive farmers in the world. How crazy can you be? This is the madness of, as George calls them, the lords, the EcoLords. Probably translates better. EcoLords in Greek, but EcoLords You have to reverse it. It sounds better in English that way, by reversing the order of the words. EcoLords. These are the people that are running the show, the EcoLords of the West. They are destroying the West because they don't know what they're doing. And if we don't call politicians and pressure them and threaten them and make sure that they basically, are so stressed that they're weak at the knees, they're not going to invest in the stuff that we need to save us. And these lunatics not only going to basically fail to win against Russia, they are going to fail big time, because the most effective way of actually defeating Russia? It's a commodity producer. You bring down the cost of energy, which is the key thing that their revenue comes from. Their own, the nation's income starts shrinking. They can't sustain a war. We're financing it, or the Fed is financing the Russian successors. How crazy can you be? So they're indebting the entire Western population to provide Ukraine with weapons. You and I are paying for all this nonsense of all these weapon replacements. And on the other hand, they are making sure that the Russians have basically got a high oil price and raking in all the wealth to basically keep their military industrial complex going. Absolute madness. As I said, these ponies have no idea how to put on a show. They are completely and utterly deranged and demented. They have lost the plot. We need to boot these lords, these eco-lords out now or yesterday if we're going to survive the coming calamities. These people have got no idea. They're going to collapse everything. They're going to destroy the West. The West is going to be destroyed by these clowns. This clown world has to end. And it's up to people like us. Call and put the pressure on. Because if we don't do it, we're stuffed. I mean, big time we're stuffed. Anyway, guys, I'll leave it at that. Take care.